How SpaceX became the 21st century's most iconic startup. If you follow technology news, you've probably heard of SpaceX. Maybe you're already familiar with the company, but maybe all you know is that they have something to do with rockets. For almost 60 years, people have been visiting space, but space exploration has traditionally been the realm of governments, not private companies. Space launches were expensive, and no one knows what it would take to make outer space a profitable place to do business. Because of this, space travel has been limited to a handful of astronauts. From 1961 to the present day, fewer than 600 people have ever reached Earth's orbit. This led to a bottleneck in space resources. The US, Russia, China, and other major space powers only have so much money to invest in spaceflight. With most of those resources tied up in the International Space Station and other low Earth orbit applications, there wasn't a lot of money left over to innovate in deep space exploration. At the same time, low Earth orbit activity had become routine. After the Apollo landings and through the Space Shuttle era, the only manned missions outside of low Earth orbit were repair missions to the Hubble Space Telescope. Then, on July 21st, 2011, the Space Shuttle Atlantis touched down at the Kennedy Space Center. For the first time in decades, the US had no way to put a manned mission into space. The only countries with the technology were China and Russia. The issue facing NASA was the same issue affecting every other spacefaring nation. Going to outer space is very expensive. Before SpaceX, it cost $10,000 per pound to put anything into space. If you wanted to be able to put up satellites or deep space probes, a manned spaceflight program could be prohibitively expensive. So what does any of this have to do with SpaceX? The story begins with Elon Musk, a young tech entrepreneur who was flush with cash from selling a little startup called PayPal. Musk had dreams of sending people to Mars, but he needed a rocket to do it. Shocked at the price of American rocket launches, he went to Russia and tried to buy some old discount rockets. But even then, they were well outside of his price range. Musk had identified the same problem that was plaguing major world powers. Rockets are expensive. He obsessed over the problem for the entire flight home. I was trying to understand why rockets were so expensive, Musk says. Obviously, the lowest cost you can make anything for is the spot value of the material constituents. After that, if you had a magic wand and could rearrange the atoms. So there's a question of how efficient you can be about getting the atoms from raw material state to rocket shape. Later in 2002, Musk partnered with some other investors to found Space Exploration Technologies Corp., or SpaceX for short. They applied a policy called vertical integration to their business. Musk wanted to keep costs down, and buying a lot of parts from established manufacturers could get expensive. Whenever possible, SpaceX built their own equipment from the ground up. Not only did this keep costs down, but it created a positive, can-do engineering culture that remains with the company to this day. For 6 years, SpaceX built a series of prototypes to test their technology. Finally, on September 29, 2008, they achieved their first successful launch. But vertical integration was only part of the solution. The other part was making the rockets themselves reusable. A rocket itself is divided into several components, but the most expensive component is the first stage. This stage is the longest part of the rocket, and it makes up the entire bottom portion. It's the portion of the rocket that lifts everything from the launch pad into orbit. From there, the first stage is jettisoned. On a conventional rocket, the first stage simply falls back to Earth and burns up in the atmosphere. This gets the job done, but it isn't exactly the most efficient system. 75% of the rocket just burned up in the atmosphere. The rest of the rocket, such as the second stage, is generally lost as well. But by retrieving intact first stages and reusing them, SpaceX could save a huge amount of money on each launch. The more times a first stage can be reused, the more money the company and the customers will save. In 2015, SpaceX made their first successful landing of a rocket's first stage. In May of 2016, they followed up by successfully landing a rocket on their drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. This technology has allowed SpaceX to lower costs to the neighborhood of $2,000 to $3,000 per pound. Going to outer space might not be cheap, but it's certainly not as expensive. The heart of SpaceX's fleet is the Falcon 9 rocket. This rocket is 70 meters, 230 feet high, and is capable of carrying a payload of just over 25 tons to low Earth orbit. Typically, missions are limited to just over 17 tons, which is necessary to leave enough fuel for the rockets to land. But what if you need to carry a larger payload or go even higher? In that case, the Falcon Heavy is a better tool for the job. The Falcon Heavy consists of 3 Falcon 9 boosters with a total of 27 Merlin engines. This makes it capable of delivering payloads of 70 tons to low Earth orbit or 29 tons to geostationary orbit. You can even transport 18.5 tons to Mars. Speaking of Mars, that's where Elon Musk is headed next. When complete, the SpaceX Starship will be the largest spacecraft ever completed. It's expected to fly at some point in 2020 or early 2021, although Musk has been known to set overly optimistic deadlines. Whether it ultimately launches, the Starship will be capable of taking people to Mars or even further. Not only that, but Musk forecasts a cost per pound of only $1,100. So, with all of this activity and product in development, how does SpaceX stay profitable? Their rockets may be profitable, but they still don't run for free. Back in 2006, SpaceX won a contract with NASA to develop a lightweight spacecraft that can make deliveries to low Earth orbit. If you're paying attention, this was nearly 2 years before SpaceX had even launched a successful rocket. Why would NASA partner with a small company with no track record? The answer is money. Because the deal was a partnership, NASA only had to invest $396 million, while SpaceX spent $500 million of its own money developing the Falcon 9 rocket. In purely financial terms, SpaceX was just spinning their wheels. But through this deal, they had earned a major government contract. Between 2008 and 2016, SpaceX earned a series of more cargo delivery contracts from NASA. As the Falcon 9 rockets became more reliable and reusable, costs went down, and SpaceX grew more and more profitable. SpaceX reached a new milestone on May 30th, 2020, when NASA astronauts Robert Behnken and Douglas Hurley rode a Falcon 9 rocket to the International Space Station. But for the first time in nearly a decade, America was capable of putting human beings in space. But instead of a government agency at this point, it's a private company. SpaceX's success has not come without its share of controversy. Notably, on September 6, 2018, Musk famously smoked cannabis on Joe Rogan's podcast. This led to allegations that Musk was in violation of drug requirements for federal contractors. On the other hand, the main competition is nowhere near where SpaceX is in terms of quality and reliability. The only other vehicle with a contract for crewed launches is the Boeing Starliner. But the Starliner suffered a major failure during a test launch earlier this year, and the capsule never reached the International Space Station. At this time, there's no word on when the Starliner will fly again. Moreover, SpaceX beats out the competition on billing. Most American aerospace companies work on a contract model called costs plus. This means that they receive a guaranteed profit even if the project never pans out or goes over budget. SpaceX works on a flat fee model. This has incentivized them to think outside the box and take full advantage of their vertically integrated supply chain. They keep their costs lower than the competition, which keeps the government offering them more contracts. With these developments, SpaceX is the clear leader in the private space launch business. With the debut of the Falcon Heavy later this year, they'll have heavy lift capability that many major nations can only dream of. And with a reliable fleet of Falcon 9 rockets, the profits just keep on flowing in.